the very clients they're serving demand diversity, and that they will lose business if they do not continue to change and cultivate a culture that is welcoming and inclusive. All right, guys, we've got an incredible guest on today, Chief Justice Cheri Beasley. She is the 29th Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court and is actually the first female African-American Chief Justice in the history of the North Carolina court system. She leads more than 6,500 elected officials and more than, and all those employees in 102 courthouses in North Carolina, because she is the head of the entire judicial branch of the government in North Carolina. I can't imagine the responsibilities that you have and what a typical day is like for you. But what's really interesting is that not only are you the first African-American female Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, there are only 4 Black female Chief Justices in US history. So this is obviously huge. You've got 20 years of experience on the bench, chair of the North Carolina Equal Access to Justice Commission. Thank you for being on. My first question is, do you sleep?
Do you? Thanks for having me on, Cheslie. You know what? I do sleep, but this is quite a phenomenal time in history. It's a phenomenal time for the court. It's a phenomenal time really for the nation right now as we're going through this whole COVID-19 crisis and pandemic. But I am so honored to be serving as Chief Justice. It's been quite an interesting time. Lord knows I certainly did not know that we would end up in a pandemic when I agreed to do this, but I'm really honored to serve.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. And we're glad to have you because obviously you have tons of experience, 7 years of experience on the Supreme Court, 4 years on the Court of Appeals, 10 in the District Court. So you've been there, you've been in the trenches for a while. So I mean, before the pandemic started, what was a typical day like for you?
There really wasn't a typical day. I was traveling 4 to 5 days a week, either on the official side, working with courts across the state, and we have 100 counties in North Carolina, lots of urban counties as well as rural counties, and then I was also traveling for my campaign. And so just helping people to know about what the Chief Justice does and what my role is, and really transitioning and moving forward with our courts. That's what I was doing before the pandemic.
So it's been a little over a year. What are you most proud of doing in North Carolina?
I've been really proud of a whole lot of things. I've been really proud of the fact that we have begun an e-courts program, and you and I have talked about the fact that in North Carolina, we are still unfortunately using DOS systems. And so it's been really exciting to be able to completely transform and revolutionize our technology to make access so much easier for not just lawyers and judges, but for the public as well. That's a process that has to go forward. And so that's going to take us a little bit of time, but to start that process has been really exciting. It's been exciting to do more around substance abuse treatment courts in North Carolina and veterans courts and school justice partnerships to help young people to stay out of courts and to stay into schools and to see them successful. So everything that I've done really has been very exciting.
Yeah, well, yeah, and like you said, I mean, I remember graduating from law school and realizing the difference between like the federal court and the state court system. And it was surprising to me that we were filing so much stuff online in the federal court system, but not so much in the state court system. And so for any non-lawyers who are listening, like when I graduated from law school, we would literally have like a courier if we needed to file pleadings, like a complaint or anything. We would literally have a courier go down to the courthouse and file something in person rather than being able to file online. So, I mean, for any non-lawyers who are listening, what exactly did e-courts do? Or what is that program about in North Carolina?
Well, and it's still, we still haven't really formulated it yet. I mean, we've started the implementation, and so it will start to roll out on some of our counties going forward, but it will literally allow every lawyer to have access to files for every client they have. The judges and the clerks of court will have the same kind of access. The public will have access to their files, and so they won't have the same level of access as judges, but they will have a level of access. So not to have to come to the courthouse is a really big deal. I mean, in some counties in North Carolina, the courthouse might be 20 miles away, so to be able to go online to access files is transformative. So I'm really excited about that. I do think that, as challenging as the pandemic has been for not just the courts, but for people in navigating their lives. I mean, it's forced us to think differently about technology. We're having hearings by audiovisual technology, lots of meetings, as you all know, by audiovisual technology, some telephonic hearings as well. And so it's forced us to think differently and to do things better in a lot of ways.
Exactly, exactly. Well, and I think, you know, the court system itself can be so scary and daunting for some people. I think, you know, allowing it to be online may help them to look at things differently since they can access it themselves rather than having to go down to the courthouse and sort of be afraid. I mean, I would probably think of that the same way. And that, like, I never had to file my own pleadings. Like, we had somebody take it down there. If I went to the courthouse, I'd be lost myself, and I'm an attorney. So yeah, I think I'm so excited to hear about that. And proud of all the things that you've done. I mean, it's so exciting for me to be able to brag to other people about everything the North Carolina court system is doing. And I know that you're obviously a huge part of that, being the leader of our judicial system. So thank you for all of that. Now, obviously, one of the things that we talked about was the fact that, you know, you're the first Black female to serve as Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. So when you were appointed, what was going through your mind?
So it remains exciting. I'm glad to do the work, and I was very thrilled that the governor chose me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what happened right after you were appointed? Did your phone blow up? What was the response?
Well, it did, and I heard from people, family and friends were very excited, but I heard from people literally from all over the world who shared in that excitement around this appointment, around my service. And so it was nice to see in this global communal family of people who had no ties at all, who could appreciate the import of the moment, to appreciate the import of my service. And I think in some ways, symbolically, feel some sense of kinship around the fact that diversity is really important in every segment of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that diversity is important in the judicial system?
Well, I think all of us come to this work with our own set of experiences, our own set of personal experiences, professional experiences, life experiences. And North Carolina actually has the most diverse Supreme Court in the nation now, with 3 African Americans, 3 women, and the first Jewish member in 200 years of the court's existence. So I think North Carolinians can be very proud of the fact that the court is wonderfully and increasingly reflective of the demographics of the state. And so it does make a difference. Our respective voices make a difference. And diversity of thought is hugely important in the court cases, but in everything that we do.
Exactly. Now, you know, I also mentioned that you're one of only 4 Black women to serve as Chief Justices of any Supreme Court in the nation ever. And I think 2 of those are retired and 1 is currently serving. Is that right?
The other is currently serving. Chief Justice Burnett Johnson out of Louisiana is still currently serving.
Why do you think there have been so few Black women to serve in that vital role?
Our numbers are still incredibly low. And when you look at who's serving in big law firms like yours, there's not a lot of racial diversity. Women make up half of law school classes all across the nation, but not a lot of women. They may start in large law firms, but they don't stay there. The quality of life just not as they would have it to be. And thankfully, young women like you have choices. And so they choose to navigate their lives differently, and they really do choose a greater sense of balance for themselves. And so I think all of us have to be mindful that we want to make sure that we're keeping talented women and African Americans and other racial and ethnic minorities in the profession, because that diversity at all around our profession is really important. And so it's important for us to be mindful and responsive to the needs of young people like you, because you really are leading our profession into what it will be.
I agree. And I think that there are so many law firms that have looked at that challenge and have tried to overcome it or tried to work with talented and diverse new classes. And I think that many across the board have struggled with it. And so what do you think law firms and judicial systems and the legal industry as a whole can do to make sure that we're increasing that diversity? I mean, you mentioned that, you know, we can make sure that we're serving our needs. I mean, does that mean making sure that we have mentors, or making sure that law firms as a whole have robust diversity programs like MIP? What specifically can we do?
Well, I certainly think mentoring is important, but I also believe that changing the culture is very important. Folks are not going to stay if they don't feel comfortable. And so it's so important for law firms, but all of us to value not just the concept of diversity, but to value people and to value, I mean, that having diverse populations making contributions to organizations all over also means that there will be diverse thought, and there will be thoughts contributed that may be very different from those that we're used to hearing. And we can't reject those, even if we're not comfortable with them. We have to think about how to collaborate and how to have fruitful and honest conversations around inclusivity. Those are tough conversations often, but they really have to happen, and we really have to really dig deep and realize that, you know, diversity really isn't just a concept. I mean, there are clients, your clients, who are saying we really do want more diverse legal teams. And so the way to do that is to really, and it's not just a program, it's not just a step, it's a process, and it's a years long commitment to making sure that law firms and other legal communities are diverse, and that diversity really is an expectation, not an exception.
Exactly, exactly. Well, and I like that you mentioned that clients are starting to demand it, because I agree that, you know, that's an important, essential part for law firms to know that the very clients they're serving demand diversity, and that they will lose business if they do not continue to change and cultivate a culture that is welcoming and inclusive when it comes to minorities and other diverse applicants and employees. So I think it's important for all of us to have healthy leadership, have leadership that doesn't constantly have tunnel vision, and you're clearly one of those leaders. So when the coronavirus initially broke out in North Carolina, you put together the COVID-19 Judicial Branch Task Force. You guys had like your third meeting last week, is that right?
That's correct. And I appointed the task force, but I don't meet with them. I don't want to stifle their conversation. I want them to feel free to say, and these meetings are open to the public. So even though they're happening through audiovisual technology, the public can hear. Leadership is responsive. We have had amazing responses around this pandemic. Folks are working very, very hard, and I'm so proud to be among them as they're working really hard to move North Carolina forward through this.
Now, as far as the effect, the long-term effect of the pandemic on the judicial court system, what do you think the court system will look like in North Carolina moving forward? Do you think that we'll continue to, or start really placing a heavier weight on being able to do things virtually? Do you think it's possible that we could have trials virtually, or do more things over the phone or on computers? What possibilities do you think there are?
I think we will. I think that's one of the improvements that we will make as a result of this pandemic. The North Carolina Court of Appeals has met through AV technology. The Supreme Court will likely also do the same. And when I say meet, I mean whole oral arguments. The Supreme Court will likely do the same in June, whole oral arguments by AV technology. And so I think in the way that many in our profession were resistant to knowing more about AV technology, I think increasingly we know how much more we can do and how much more safely we can do it. And so I think for some time, as we understand more and more about this pandemic and COVID-19, I think we will need to increasingly rely on technology.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us, Chief Justice Beasley. I mean, it really is, your insight is incredible for us to have, and it's great to hear about the steps that North Carolina has taken towards making sure that people have access to the court system in the future. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, I can't tell you just how proud we are of you, Cheslie, in North Carolina, but really in this nation for how wonderfully and intelligently you've represented us as a profession and as women. And I'm just so proud of you. And I know that only the moon is your destination. So I'm excited about that.